You'll forgive me, I hope, if I'm not in the mood for a Peeps and Pink Bunnies Easter, or even a brunch with bubbly and long-lost buddies Easter. And though I am happy to be able to wear these beautiful colors that Matrita gave to me, Easter must be more than these bright colors this year. It has been a deep, dark Lent for me, as it has been for many of you. In January, I met friends from St. Luke's at the beach who were caring for an 11-year-old who had just lost her father to COVID-19. Her mother was busy making burial arrangements. In February, I brought banana bread to another St. Luke's household rocked by the death of a young man whose mental health had unraveled and supports had crumbled under the pressures of the pandemic. At the same time, talking with a parishioner who felt unsafe in her own home as vulturous relatives descended after her friend and roommate died. And then, in March, I said prayers over and anointed the body of Michael, a beloved, brilliant 18-year-old boy turning toward manhood, a son of our church who was killed by persons still unknown. I heard the sobs break out anew at his funeral when his 9-year-old sister, Fifi, held the microphone to say she missed him. And this is not all for me or for you. So, an Easter made of papery, thin, bright colors and brittle plastic eggs alone cannot speak joy this year, if it ever did. Because I know that I'm not alone. My short litany of suffering and loss is just one calendar of shadows, grief, and death. You have your own. We have other griefs among us as a community I haven't named. So then, what kind of Easter images can speak peace to our battered hearts then? What kind of Easter traditions might bring us to the place of new life we hunger for, personally and communally? Some of the most ancient ones, actually. First, an image. In the oldest and original account of Easter Sunday, in the Gospel of Mark, the reading we just read today, the bewildered women at the empty tomb do not see the risen Christ, but they are told by a young man dressed in white that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. And that is the end. Here, we must know, must remember, that for Jesus' friends and disciples, Galilee is not a far-off mission field. Galilee is home. Galilee is the ordinary life waiting for you on the other side of devastation. The fishing nets Peter and John must return to in confusion and grief. Indeed, in one gospel that didn't make it into the Bible, one called the Gospel of Peter, we actually catch a glimpse of Peter fishing back in Galilee, sad, downcast, when finally the risen Christ comes to him there. Here's the thing. The risen Christ, the Spirit of Jesus, the very embodiment of forgiveness, healing, and hope beyond the traumatic power of death, well, he does not always show up while we are still on a journey to Jerusalem that has gone terribly, terribly wrong. The poet John Masefield described Christ as alive and at large in the world, and I trust this with all my heart. I know this to be a spiritual reality as true as the existence of my children. And yet, it doesn't mean I know when or how I or anyone else will encounter him anew. when I or anyone else will be transformed anew by the light and life he bears. The promise of faith is simply that those who sincerely seek will and do meet this living and gracious Lord in countless ways and on variable timelines. Sometimes, though, we must get back to our nets, back to our ordinary work before we see him. As we work and wait, hope sings the tune without the words in our own soul, and the choirs of witnesses who have walked through death before add their resounding voices to the chorus of the life-giving Holy One. Who are you looking for? Do not be afraid. You will see me. I am always with you. Let's try on another Easter image to meet our 2021 reality from a different account. Very explicitly in the Gospel of John, in the passage we'll hear in church next week, and more subtly in the Gospel of Luke. In some scenes, the truth of Jesus' triumph over death is only known through gazing at, even touching his wounds, the marks of torture and execution still upon his hands, feet, side. In other words, the Easter witness doesn't lose power when we gaze upon or come close to reminders of pain and death. We do not need to turn away from the broken body to celebrate Easter. Indeed, Christianity has always insisted that we must remember the death that taught us to see death differently, the painful sacrifice that transformed our understanding of God's loving forgiveness, so that then we might live in greater joy and freedom. It is said that Queen Victoria did not like to celebrate communion on Easter Sunday because she did not like all that gloomy talk about broken bodies and death ruining the joy of the day. With all due respect to the Queen, I think she failed to realize how much we who are in touch with suffering need to hear the full journey of Christ. It is not a psychological fad to insist that the promise of new life does not and will not erase the traumas of the past, even as the ruptures are healed and their destructive power is overcome. To consider and reconsider the wound in the presence of God is part of the DNA of Judeo-Christian faith. It is even part of our resurrection stories. From Judaism, the well-known concept of tikkun olam, repair of the world, was first described to me through the metaphor of broken pottery. We are invited to participate in the mending of a broken world, drawing upon the Jewish roots of our faith and our Jewish Messiah. Christians believe that in the wake of the resurrection, the Spirit of the risen Christ is indeed renewing the face of the earth, and we are invited to share in the ongoing work of renewal, reconciliation, and new creation. But I am sometimes guilty of imagining Easter life, new life, in a very consumeristic way. Broken bowl, throw it out. A pretty pastel bowl, brand new, needs to replace it if it's going to be a good Easter. Easter's on its way. Yet to repair, to reconcile, one must gaze upon the fractures the wounds, the places that are broken. The Christian artist Makoto Fujimura practices kintsugi, the Japanese art of mending broken pottery with a precious metal mix that highlights, rather than masks, the fracture lines in seams of gold. Likewise, the pandemic fractured and broken bowls of our lives and communities cannot and will not be discarded and replaced. The real story of Easter, the story of Jesus, restores wholeness and function by highlighting and transforming the cracks, our sin and brokenness and death, not by turning from them or erasing them. We remember again and again as part of entering into a true fullness of life. I witnessed one gleaming vein of repair on the day of Michael's burial. Standing in the spring sunshine at the cemetery hilltop, nearly 150 people wearing double masks formed a giant circle around his grave. The flowers had been laid on his casket, and the undertaker had tried to dismiss us, but the people would not move. We would not look away from this beloved body until the sod was laid. In the circle were school friends from La Jolla Country Day School, all the Sudanese American aunties here like Susie, who had raised him like their own sweet son, his grandmothers Tabisa and Adut, railing at the heavens in lament, tall young men from St. Luke's on the cusp of adulthood who had grown a foot since I'd last seen them before lockdown, a small ensemble of Congolese and Sudanese voices from this church and God's mountain, offering alleluias in different languages, but with one faith in God's love for Michael, for us all, that extends beyond the grave. We stood in near silence through the work of the backhoe, resolutely demonstrating our love and care for the Jock family when we had nothing else to offer. We stared at the chasm of a tragic death, and we did not turn away. This is our golden glue, if we have any, now and in the weeks and months to come, to share the burdens of our griefs, to demonstrate our love, even when we don't have any adequate words, to hold the fragments tenderly in our hands until the time for repair is right. We laid his body to rest with the honor his life deserved. And somehow, staring together at death, there was a touch of beauty and goodness in the wind. It felt like the first light of Easter. The Spirit of the risen Lord renews the face of the earth. We are not the first generation to face hardship, and we will not be the last. But Christ is alive and yearning to surprise us in the wake of every devastation with a tender and creative power of redemption. And we can join our voices with the generations past who sang his praises for the ways this truth manifests in our diverse lives. walk into Easter, into Galilee, into our eventual return to ordinary life with hope. Even if you are still a bit shaky, a bit trembly from 2020 and the first part of 2021. Jesus will meet you there. Jesus will meet us there. In fact, he's already walking along the road with us, even when we don't recognize him. My brothers and sisters, those are the parts of Easter worth celebrating, worth more than any fancy restaurant meal or new spring outfit. The glittery edges of Easter may fade or even feel glaring after a dark year. But the warm light of the risen Christ is perfectly at home in the brokenness of our lives, our world. He has been in darkness before, but it did not overcome him. He is light, and he is life, and he is a master of rising. You will see me, he says. I am always with you. Amen.